Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're all excellent. In today's video, I want to talk about the most useful and the most inspiring pieces of gear that I got to try this year, rather than just limit myself to pieces of equipment that came out in 2020, though I'm going to be including a little section at the end where I talk about gear that didn't come out in 2020 that I bought, that I really like, and that I think you would all like as well. So let's get straight into it. Let's get this one out of the way straight away, and this is going to be absolutely no surprise to any of you who watch a lot of the channel. It's the Fractal FM3. I got this unit in February on a Thursday, I believe, so I had about 24 hours with it. I dialed in my main live patch, and then I took it on an Australian tour. This was in the golden days back in February before the entire world shut down, but it really got a trial by fire there. I was able to add an expression pedal, and I took it with my PRS SC245. I ran it DI at all the shows. The first show was a really tiny club show at Whole Lotta Love in Melbourne with a really small PA. It sounded great, it worked great. The next show was at a much bigger venue for Melodic Rock Festival, so I got to run it through this giant system, and it just sounded absolutely epic. Took it around to a bunch of other shows where, you know, the ultimate test we all think about with stuff like this that sits on the floor. A guy at our Sydney show fell over the monitors with a beer in his hand, landed on my unit, spilled the beer everywhere, and it didn't skip a beat. So yeah, that was like the ultimate test in that particular case. And you know, because I've spent so much time sitting at home over the last couple of months as well, I've just been able to pull this out, plug it in. Because it sits, you know, on the floor, it's a very different tactile experience to using the Axe FX3, which is basically the hub of my studio. But I like this as a kind of desktop unit as well, where you can just tweak it without having to use the computer editor, and we all know it just sounds amazing whatever you put into it. I've also used it on a bunch of acoustic gigs so that I can use the looper, some compression, some reverb, and it's really handy in that particular case there. So no surprises that the FM3 is both incredibly useful and incredibly inspiring for me. Another piece of gear that I think has just been really useful for me is this. This is the AirStep from Xsonic. So it doesn't look like much, but it is a small 5-button MIDI controller with 2 different MIDI ports, 2 switching jacks. There's MIDI in, so you can forward MIDI commands to a bunch of gear, and there are 2 expression pedal jacks here. The really cool stuff about this is that you can program it via Bluetooth using your phone, which I really like. It's rechargeable, so if you just want to grab this, charge it up, and I've done a bunch of gigs with this where I've run it like this, you don't need a power cable, or you don't need like a MIDI 7-pin cable going to it or anything, and it charges up from a kind of standard phone charger. Again, really handy. And it also comes, if you want to, you can get their just Bluetooth only version of this, and you can either set these up as like a 10-button foot switch together, or you can have them mirror one another. So you could say, take your FM3, connect this to it, and I've done gigs like this as well, and just sat this at the back of the stage, and then I've got wireless MIDI control from the AirStep, because it does Bluetooth as well. If you want to hook this up to like an iPad and use a setlist manager, or have your sheet music up and turn pages and all those kind of things. You can use the switching relays to control your amp. You can combine it in 4-cable method with an amp and an FM3 and a bunch of other stuff, and just build the rig of doom if that's something that you want to do. Or like I've been using it, you know, just 5 extra foot switches to change scenes on my Fractal. So this has been a super handy piece of gear. It even switches channels on my Boogie Mark IV, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. So yeah, just incredibly useful. And again, because it's using a phone app, it's super easy to program. So if you're immediate, it's not too challenging either. While we're talking about pieces of gear that are really useful, this one has been really useful again for my acoustic gigs, is the Boss RC500. If you haven't checked out my in-depth video with this, go and check it out, because it's, okay, on the surface, it's a 2-track looper. They've updated all the built-in drum sounds, so they finally sound really good, which is a big bonus. There is a mic preamp in here. There is MIDI functionality, and you can basically let the foot switches do anything you want them to do. There's a bunch of built-in effects that, rather than just be, you know, like guitar effects that have been ported over. They're actually more useful in a kind of like looper sense, where there's some kind of like shuffle controls, there's glitchy controls, there's a tape stop that's really interesting. And yeah, again, just the kind of deep tweaking functionality of this and the ability to customize it, I think really makes it a winner. And this is just absolutely gonna get thrashed by me over the next couple of years, because as I said earlier, I do a bunch of looping gigs, and having, just the ability to send a rhythm track out of its own output to a mixer while you've got your looper to another output on a mixer, I really can't understate how easy that makes it to mix at a gig, because you can use the faders on your desk rather than trying to balance it within the unit. Furthermore, you can expand it with extra control switches, or like I said, MIDI. So, pairing this with the AirStep and the FM3 is one hell of a looping rig. A few more hardware units to talk about before we move over to some software units really quickly, but I do have to mention the Eventide Black Hole. Just simply stunning reverb in a pedal, and this one is super inspiring. I've used this a lot on synthesizers as well, and it's one of those things where, if you're like me and you're not a synth player and you just kind of start out with a very basic synth patch, you just add this to it and it immediately gives you this incredible ambience. It's like instant Blade Runner reverb basically, and it's actually super creative as well. You can use it sort of as a reverb and a delay, you can use it as a reverse reverb, you can do all the vanilla stuff, or you can use it as like a sound on sound like feedback looper as well. Again, go and check out my video if you want to hear about the possibilities. But I would have to say probably the kind of most crazy, out there, inspiring piece of gear that I tried this year was the PolyFX Digit and Bebo. So Digit and Bebo refer to different firmwares you can load into this unit. In fact, you don't have to do anything external. You just go and select a different firmware from the menu, but you have 3 foot switches and you have a touch screen, and it's basically a virtual modular environment. So if you want to use Eurorack style effects, like a lot of the Mutable Instruments Eurorack modules have been ported into here, like clouds and marbles and rings, like all the really wild synth stuff. You can get that on your guitar. Furthermore, you can load up cabinet IRs, you can load up convolution reverbs. If anything, I think that's the coolest thing, the fact that you can use it as an IR and a reverb IR loader. And on the Bebo side, there's a bunch of really cool, unique modulation modules in there, as well as synthesis modules. So this is an instrument, and now that there's sequencers and chaos controllers as well, you can do some wild synth stuff with this. So for me, as someone who's just starting to dip their toes into the water of modular synthesis, this saves me going and buying a whole Eurorack setup, and plus I can use it on my guitar. In fact, you can use this as a standalone direct guitar rig as well. And furthermore, there's 4 ins and outs, and these are actually stereo, so it looks like 2 ins and 2 outs, but you can get 4 audio channels in and out. There's MIDI as well. You can use it as a MIDI controller as well if that's something that you want to do. So yeah, just stunning. And furthermore, shout out to Lockie at PolyFX, because this thing is made by hand in Australia, which I think is a really sweet thing, just from my perspective as well, because I'm an Australian. Sometimes I want to feel a little bit patriotic. We'll round out this list with one last unit, and look at this thing. It doesn't look like much, but this is the Mighty Plug from UX, and this for me is easily the best piece of budget gear this year. You just plug it into your guitar and then you plug headphones in here. It will Bluetooth to your phone, and you can get some admittedly pretty basic amp modeling and effects, but it actually sounds pretty decent. So this is something that just lives in my guitar bag. If I'm doing a gig and I want to warm up, I can just chuck this on with my headphones. And yeah, I mean, it's just so cute as well, and it's so cheap. So it's amazing that they've been able to cram the things they've crammed into this particular unit here. And NUX also came out with the MG300, which is a tiny little modeler as well that I was pretty impressed with. So they are doing some really good stuff as well. I know it's not specifically guitar related, but let's go and check out a couple of pieces of software that I really liked this year, because I was stuck at home for a long period of time and I ended up doing a whole bunch of recording and a whole bunch of mixing, and these were my go-to plugins. One of the silver linings of 2020 was having lots and lots of time to work on projects that I had set aside. I'm sure a lot of you feel exactly the same. And one of them was mixing a live recording by my band Ragdoll. We recorded a show we did at Cherry Bar in Melbourne at the start of 2019. And I really wanted to get it mixed. And I thought, you know what, why not have a crack at it myself? And I am not a mix engineer. I'm an absolute simpleton when it comes to mixing stuff. So one plugin that was just incredibly useful is this Parallel Aggressor from Baby Audio. They've got quite a few really well-priced and really well-specced plugins. I've got their parallel compressor called iHeartNY, and this is basically that plugin plus some saturation and a few other little features in here. And I just really like the way it sounds on drums and bass and basically on a whole mix, just to add a little bit of saturation and parallel compression as it's designed to do. I really like the UI and the sliders here. So you have parallel compression, that's spank, and you have heat, that's a saturation. And I mostly used it on the drum bus here. The drums, the raw tracks sounded shocking, and I had to do quite a bit of work just to get them to sound like drums. So let's have a listen to this plugin on the drum bus the way I used it. So you can hear it's just making everything kind of pop and sound a lot punchier and kind of glued together. I'm not really using the saturation side there, but I did kind of do the opposite, where there's a less parallel compression and more saturation on basically the instrument bus here for the whole mix. So let's have a listen to that with and without. Rewind your mind, it's easy. You make hell for yourself, trying to please me. Rewind your mind completely. You should know not to show. So that's a lot more subtle there. I also use it on the bass guitar as well. I tried it on the guitars and didn't like it as much without, but it was just a really great utility plugin. I also used this all over the Live from Isolation EP that we did in April when everything was locked down. And again, it just made stuff sound better, and it meant I could twist like, 3 or 4 knobs and instantly have something that I like the sound of without kind of having to overthink stuff or go and watch a bunch of YouTube videos. It just worked, and that makes it in the top list of most useful pieces of music gear for 2020 for me. While we're talking about plugins, I would also have to say that probably the most inspiring plugin I tried this year, and also one of the just most amazing ones because it is free, is Valhalla Supermassive. And I use this all over the vocal tracks for the Ragdoll Live from Isolation EP. I'll give you a very, very quick sample of that. So this is Ryan's dry vocal from the intro for the song Shine.
We are waiting for the sun to shine. Shed my skin, lift the darkness from my eyes. No more tears to cry.
Pretty epic, right? Let's hear that in the mix now. I'll put it back on so that that send is bypassed, and then I'll kick it in.
No more tears to cry.
Amazing on 2 fronts. Sonically, just absolutely superb, and also it's free. Go and grab it while you're at it. Grab some other Valhalla plugins as well. They all sound fantastic, and they're all pretty much $50, which is amazingly good value. The final plugin that I'll talk about, which ties in with the just kind of sheer utility and idiot-proof factor that I had with Parallel Aggressor, is iZotope RX8 Voice Denoise, because I use it on every single one of the videos that I make. For example, if I don't have denoise on, this is what my vocal microphone picking up everything in my room. There's a bunch of crackles, there's an air conditioner, and then I just slap RX denoise on the adaptive mode at stock settings, and you get this. It's so much cleaner and clearer. It's basically magic, like most of the other iZotope stuff. Cannot recommend it enough. To round things out, let's talk about some pieces of gear that didn't come out in 2020 that I finally got a chance to try that I absolutely loved. Right at the top of the list is the Boogie Mark IV. I finally tried one of these in February, I think, at the start of this year. I borrowed one. Shout out to Bron for loaning me his Mark IV, and I just immediately fell in love with it. It is everything I've ever wanted in an amplifier, and for me right now, the sort of tones that I like, it's the perfect amp. I have used the model of this particular amplifier extensively in my Axe effects. In fact, my main live Axe effects patch is built around the model of this amp. They sound so similar that I really can't say that I need the hardware version of this amp, but when I plug it in, when I smell the tubes, when I move some air with it, when I get to twist some knobs and move the sliders on there, it kind of becomes a need. And it is just such an inspiring amplifier. And for me right now, you know, like I said, this is sort of the one. So I'm very, very fortunate to have bought one of these this year, and this is definitely a forever piece of gear. Another piece of gear, maybe not as old, that I did get a chance to check out, and because I'm a delay junkie, is the Dig from Strymon, their kind of rack-inspired delay. And I mean, this just sounds so good. It's it's simple. It's a dual delay line, and basically you can have a three-way switch for modulation, and there's 3 different delay modes. I just leave it parked on the 12-bit delay mode, and it sounds so good. When I want to plug in a pedal and I want to twist some knobs, this is basically the first one that I reach for. And you know, Strymon deserve their reputation because they build amazing stuff, and this just sounds so good. And you know, paired with this, it's a pretty inspiring combination, and I could easily gig with that combo. Speaking of kind of digital things that are maybe overlooked by me in the past, or were overlooked by me in the past, I finally got a chance to try a Yamaha SPX90. You know, I've been doing all these videos with rack mount units, and I got this for one reason. I wanted to experience the symphonic chorus mode for myself, and that sounds fantastic. It's instant Zakk Wylde No More Tears, which is one of my favorite guitar sounds ever. But I have to say, I'm really impressed with the dual delay in here, the pitch detune, the reverbs, the gated reverbs. It's just a great sounding rack mount effects. And again, I could easily say pair these two up, or pair this up with my Boogie Studio Pre or Triaxis and go and do a gig with it. So yeah, the SPX90 is, you know, it was, for what it does, really, really cheap used. I know they've had their reliability issues, but this one is a super clean example, and it belongs in this list of inspiring used gear that I picked up this year. A few extra little bits that I found really useful. I wouldn't say it's tiny, but the Atomic CLR Neo, it is very lightweight for its size. I could carry this in one hand with a dual guitar bag and my FM3 in a bag on the other hand, and carry it into gigs where I wasn't able to use my in-ears. Very, very handy, really, really punchy and clear and accurate. It compares really well to my Adam A7X monitors, just way louder. On the other end of the scale, I've been using this little torch from Zenrigs. Just, you know, it's just a tiny little torch to look behind things. I have a desk with a bunch of cabling behind it. I have a rack. Having this in my guitar bag at gigs is just really indispensable. You should have a torch, and this one is really nice and lightweight, which is a win. Another thing, an iPad. Like, I don't know what I've been doing without one for so long, but whether you're kind of traveling and you want to listen to music, or you want to watch a movie, or you want to, say, run something like H9 Control with your Eventide H9 pedal, I've actually been using it as a second screen on my desk with my Mac Mini via an app called Duet. So yeah, these are, I mean, you know what an iPad does, but very, very handy. I've also been using it with the AirStep to program that. So yeah, just a really handy piece that I probably should have used a whole bunch more. And one last thing, which I don't have here with me, that was just super inspiring, and it's rocketed right to the top of the list of pieces of gear I want to acquire one day, the PRS DGT. I borrowed one off my buddy Ray. You saw a bunch of videos with it, and that, you know, if you're gonna go and buy a PRS and you've never played one before, try a DGT first. It's just amazing what you can get out of it. It's like a great vintage Strat and a great vintage Les Paul, but just so playable and smooth, and now I'm dreaming about that guitar again. So there's the gear that's either been incredibly useful or incredibly inspiring for me this year. A lot of them have been both, obviously. Of course, I want to hear from all of you. What gear has made your 2020 a little less crummy? What have you been digging? What have you really got into that you otherwise weren't into in previous years? Let me know in the comments, because like so many of you, I'm addicted to checking out brand new guitar gear, and I'm always looking for new units to try out. So let me know your favorites for 2020. Stay safe, be excellent to one another wherever you are in the world, and let's hope that 2021 is slightly less sucky as a general year than 2020. But I don't think that's going to be very, very difficult, is it? So I'll see you all next time. Take it easy.